He walked into the agency with slow but steady steps, as if he had walked in much more hostile territory than a shiny showroom. James D. Rourke, 82, a decorated veteran, was carrying a worn briefcase and a serenity in his eyes that hid invisible scars. The young, hurried salesman looked at him as if he were a nuisance. "Are you looking for your grandson?" he asked with a mocking smile. Rourke simply opened his briefcase and showed his military currency, a symbol of honor. But what he got was laughter, disbelief, and a manager who accused him of attempting a scam. Within seconds, security was called, and the man who had once taught soldiers how to survive in Vietnam was thrown out like a common fraud. But what no one there knew is that inside his jacket pocket, right next to his heart, he was keeping something that would change everything. Something that would make the entire city remember and respect. Stay with me. What you're about to see may turn your idea of justice upside down. Sitting on that concrete bench, surrounded by the indifferent noise of the city, James held the briefcase tightly. But what really hurt was the emptiness around him. It wasn't the scorching heat of the sun or the knees that complained about the weight of the years. It was the silence of the people, the silence of those who pass by and look away, as if he were part of the ground, as if he weren't there. This was crueler than any battlefield. He took a deep breath, holding the pain in his chest like someone holding a folded flag. Because it wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who was left behind, erased by the rush of the world. And maybe that's why this story is also his. Because everyone, at some point, has felt the bitter taste of being ignored when they needed recognition the most. If this touched you in any way, if you've ever experienced something similar, or know someone who has, leave a comment. Your experience may resonate with others. And when you like the video, or subscribe to the channel, you're not just pressing a button. You're helping these stories reach those who need to hear them most. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and continue to tell these truths that many people prefer to keep hidden. And James still had something in his pocket. Something that no one outside could see, but which carried an immense weight. Because sometimes, what changes everything is not the scream. It is the patience of those who wait in the midst of the storm for an answer that can only come from someone who really remember than what matters. Sitting on the cement bench on the sidewalk, the faint shadow of a parking sign dragging over his feet, James D. Rourke looked like just another tired old man waiting for time to pass. But inside him, something was breaking into silence. His faded cap that said Vietnam Vet reflected the harsh afternoon sun, while his eyes, protected by thick, scratched lenses, revealed more than his age. They revealed the weight of a lifetime that now seemed invisible. A boy passed by laughing, pointing at him as if he were a misplaced piece of furniture. "Look at that crazy old man! He must have escaped from the asylum!" Others whispered, as if the mere fact that he was there was inconvenient in itself. And James, who had once commanded men on the battlefield, was now being judged by his worn clothes and his shaky voice. No medal on his chest, no shiny badge. Just his old jacket with a stuck zipper, where he kept documents that seemed worthless anymore. But what hurt most wasn't the contempt. It was the memory. Because that humiliation already had a name, smell, taste. In 1969, tied hand and foot in a bamboo cellar in Laos, he listened to the guards laugh at his convictions. American paper courage. And there, under the sun of his own land, the echo of those words came back with a force he had not expected. It was as if time had turned back just to show that certain types of war never end. He clenched his jaw and forced his gaze forward. His grandson, Miles, was supposed to get out of school at that time. This car he was trying to buy wasn't for him. It was to ensure that the boy wouldn't have to walk through dangerous neighborhoods. It was more than transportation. It was protection. It was dignity. But how do you explain that to someone who only sees appearances? The folder was still on her lap. Inside was a laminated envelope with a certificate of honor, a yellowed photo of his old unit, and a letter folded so many times that the edges were fraying. The letter, written in military calligraphy, said just one sentence. "If one day everything fails, remember what you built." He read it so many times that he knew every mark of the ink. But today, on that cement bench, it seemed more like irony than consolation. A salesman had called it worthless paper. And the manager, without even finishing reading, threw the sheet back with a gesture of disdain, as if the memory of a lifetime could be erased with a glance. James took a deep breath and rested his hands on his knees. His skin, marked by time, was now seen as fragility, when in fact it was armor. But no one could see that there. Only the sun, growing stronger, witnessed the scene of a man who, even without saying a word, was begging for a little humanity. A lady walked up and stared for 2 seconds, then looked away. A father grabbed his son by the arm. "Don't mess with that kind of people." That kind. That phrase rang in James's head like a sentence. At what point had he gone from being a respected instructor to that kind? And yet, he didn't move. He knew that if he got up now, he would have nowhere to go. He would go home on the bus without his car, without the chance to give his grandson what he had promised. But most of all, he would return with his soul torn by yet another wound that no one would see. The kind of pain that doesn't bleed, but eats away at you from the inside, like rust in your heart. Still, something in his posture refused to give way. He crossed his arms, closed his eyes for a moment, and let the breeze touch his face. In war, this was the moment when silence came before the bombardment. A pause, where time held its breath, as if the entire universe knew something was about to happen. And it was. Inside, the manager continued to serve as if nothing had happened. But a curious attendant peered through the window. He saw the old man standing there and made a joke. People laughed. They pointed. One of them even took a picture and sent it to a group on his cell phone. Imposter Grandpa stirring up drama. The screen lit up with laughing emojis. James didn't see it, but he felt it. There was something in the air. Not just humiliation. There was a breaking point, a silent threshold that, if crossed, would awaken something no one there was prepared to face. The kind of truth that is frightening because it cannot be denied. And she would come. Now let me continue showing you what really happened that day, because what was about to unfold was not just an act of justice. It was a reminder of what it means to carry a whole life on your back without ever asking for anything in return. Comment there. There are things that age never erases. Time seemed frozen outside, but for James, every second felt like walking through an emotional minefield. The cement bench was already hurting his back, but he didn't move. The survival instructor coin now lay open in his palm, like an anchor, or maybe a mirror of everything he had been. It wasn't just metal. It was sweat and blood and decisions made under the sound of gunfire, on nights when sleeping meant dying. He remembered the boy who had handed him that coin more than 4 decades ago, his eyes wide, his hands covered in mud and fear. "If I live, it will be because of you." It never left his mind. And maybe that's why he was there now, sitting on the sidewalk of a city that had forgotten the price of freedom. The same city that allowed laughter to run down the agency's walls as if mocking an old man was a form of entertainment. James heard the manager scoff loudly. "Have you seen how many of these show up every month? Everyone thinks that worn-out jacket will guarantee a free car." And there, even without seeing them, he felt their eyes. They judged his appearance, his slow steps, his lack of modern evidence. No one asked who he was. It only mattered who he seemed to be now. And in that now, he was just a burden to a society that looks quickly, judges even faster, and forgets with surgical ease. But what no one there knew was that James Rourke always knew how to recognize when he was in enemy territory. And it wasn't the faces, nor the sharp words that hurt him. It was the indifference. The way the world treated the past like ancient trash. The hidden truth behind the scenes of that glittering showroom was that there was no room for memories, only for goals, commissions, and appearances. At the edge of the sidewalk, a piece of paper flew to his feet. It was a promotional pamphlet for the store, with a sentence in bold letters. "You deserve respect. Here, every customer is king." James almost laughed. Almost. But his face remained hard, immobile, as if every muscle had made a pact with resistance. He thought of Miles, his grandson. A good, intelligent boy, but growing up in a world that did not understand the value of silence, of honor, of the truth that is not shouted, but lived. If Miles had been there, would he have come to her defense, or would he have felt ashamed? These questions gnawed at him. And perhaps that was why he pulled from the inside pocket of his jacket something he hadn't shown anyone in years, a note with a handwritten phone number. The paper was wrinkled, stained, but the handwriting was still firm. The words had been written by a man James had personally trained, a young officer who had sworn, "If you ever need anything, call me. I'll come." James stared at the number for a few seconds. His hand hesitated. He wasn't one to ask for favors. Never had been. Pride and loyalty had walked side by side with him throughout the journey. But in that moment, it wasn't about him. It was about what he represented. About those who had gone and couldn't come back to defend their own name. He dialed. He let it ring once. And then he hung up. The breeze has returned. A light whirlwind of dust swirled in front of the agency door. Nobody noticed. But for James, it was a sign. The same wind that shook the trees in Laos minutes before the helicopter arrived. He closed his eyes for 2 seconds. The sound of propellers still echoed in some corner of memory. And even though he knew there would be no rescue from heaven today, something inside him told him the answer was already on the way, one way or another. He put the coin away, folded the paper, and put both back in his pocket, as if completing a silent ritual. His face was still stained with sweat and dust, but his eyes had taken on a different glow. It wasn't hope, it was certainty. The certainty that there was still someone who remembered. And that was all he needed at that moment. Inside the store, the activity continued. Another young couple came in smiling, greeted enthusiastically by the sales staff. One of them looked through the window, saw James, and shrugged. To him, he was just another old man waiting for a ride. Another anonymous person among many. Little did he know that he was about to witness something that would change the energy of that place completely. And on the other side of the street, the traffic began to change. Not in the cars, but in the atmosphere. Because sometimes, when the past rises, it doesn't come alone. It comes with names, faces, and stories that can't be buried. And at that exact moment, something began to move. Right there. Not all silence is weakness. The laughter came loudly, like a slap in the face from someone who has endured more pain than they should. A group of young men walked out of the agency as if they had just seen a show, except in this case, the stage was the sidewalk, and the target was a man who had once carried the weight of an entire platoon on his back. One of them pointed his cell phone at James, laughing as if he were a walking joke. "Look at that crazy veteran scammer! He's famous!" The video ended up on the stories of a local influencer, complete with a laughing emoji and an ironic soundtrack. Within minutes, the image of James spread like wildfire. An old man pretending to be a hero, according to the comments that popped up on cell phones around him. Inside the agency, no one stood up. No salesperson tried to stop them. No manager reprimanded the group. On the contrary, 2 of them were watching the video and laughing softly as if it were entertainment. One employee even said, "These guys show up every month. They already know the tricks." And there was James, sitting, motionless, watching his name, his history, his honor, turn into a joke. What many have ignored is that public humiliation has a more devastating impact than any bomb. It's not just the way others look at you, it's what it does to the soul of someone who has experienced things no one should ever see. James thought about his grandson, miles. If he saw that video, if you saw the comments, the insults, "this old man is just another one trying to take advantage of the system," how do you explain to a 14-year-old boy that the truth doesn't always have a voice? And that sometimes the whole world prefers the lie that entertains to the truth that bothers? And still, James didn't get up, didn't react. Because he knew that, in war, the time to shoot is only after the target is clear. And at that moment, the enemy was indifference. It was a shallow judgment. It was the culture of mockery disguised as humor. He looked around. No one was looking directly at him. It was as if, after the mockery, he had become transparent. A forgotten object in the landscape. A presence too uncomfortable to be respected, but too convenient to be removed. This was the new trench, a cement bench in front of an empire of appearances. But James's mind didn't stay there. It came back, quickly, like a snap. A flash of a dark night in the middle of the jungle, when he had to decide between saving 2 wounded soldiers or following the order to advance. He stayed. He carried them both on his back for 6 hours, through rain and gunfire and darkness. One of them survived, the other didn't, and the memory of what it meant to do the right thing, even when no one was watching, never left him. That was what kept him standing on the inside, even though he was sitting on the outside. And this is where the hidden truth begins to change the course of this story. Because as the laughter echoed, as fingers slid across screens to share yet another cruel joke, something, on the other side of town, was activated. A phone vibrated on a dark wooden desk surrounded by decorations. A man in uniform, his eyes fixed on a report, stopped when he saw the name flashing on the screen. It was a name he hadn't seen in years, but one he had never forgotten. He didn't answer right away. He stared at the screen. A single missed ring. No message, no explanation. Just the number. And the weight of memory. This man knew exactly what that touch meant. It was like a silent code. A lifeline that was only used when the entire world had shut down, and there was only a thread of loyalty left to hold a man upright. He stood up, walked to a cabinet, and took out a sealed envelope that had been there for 23 years. Inside was a letter. A promise made with blood and sweat. If one day you fall, I'll get up. The time had come. And meanwhile, at the agency, the contempt continued like a cheap spectacle. One of the young men approached James with his cell phone in hand. "Do you want to leave a message for TikTok, Grandpa?" James didn't answer. He just stared, his eyes fixed, steady, as if he saw beyond the flesh. The boy, bothered by the silence, stepped back. And he laughed forcedly. He's not even good for that. But there, in that moment, the atmosphere changed. A stronger wind picked up across the street. The muffled sound of a heavy engine began to echo between the buildings. It wasn't just any car. It wasn't just any arrival. It was a calculated, purposeful movement, and one with a clear purpose. Right there. Whoever forgets the past erases his own name. The paper in his hand trembled, not from the wind, but from the weight of what it represented. That ancient, firm handwriting, written in a hurry but with purpose, was not just a number. It was a bridge between 2 times. An alliance made in the mud of a humid jungle, where men learn to survive first and breathe later. James held it like someone holding the last piece of an identity that the world was trying to erase. Dialed. He squeezed firmly, but he hung up before the ringing completed. It wasn't fear. It was respect. A man like him didn't ask for help for nothing. And yet, seconds later, the phone vibrated. Just once. No message. Not a word. But the message was given. Whoever was on the other side understood. And from that moment on, the weather began to change. Even if, there on the sidewalk, no one noticed. James put the note back in his breast pocket. He adjusted his cap as he had done in his formative days, when every gesture carried meaning. And he waited again. But now, it was a different wait. No longer waiting for those who beg, but for those who know that history still has pages to turn. Inside the agency, the laughter had already died down. Maybe out of boredom, maybe because there was nothing left to make fun of. But there they were, the manager, 2 salespeople, and a group of customers who continued to pretend to be normal, oblivious to the discomfort in the air. A growing discomfort, subtle, like the sound of firm footsteps in the distance. As if the atmosphere itself was about to change color. Outside, James kept his gaze fixed on the street. He didn't blink. He didn't move. It was as if something inside him already knew what was coming. Because men who have survived firefights and jungles don't forget the smell of change, the exact moment when danger shifts, the breaking point. In the inside pocket, next to the ticket, was still the military currency. The same one that the teary-eyed 20-year-old boy had placed in his hands in the middle of the mud. If I live, it will be because of you. James never saw him again. Until, years later, a local newspaper published an article about a young officer who had risen through the ranks of the armed forces with a discipline that frightened his superiors. The name? The same as the signature on the ticket. James had reread that article so many times that he knew every line by heart. And now, with the vibration of his phone still echoing in his fingers, he knew that the story wasn't over yet. Not for him, not for that boy. The Rourke name still carried weight, even if they tried to downplay it. And while the world pretended not to see, a hidden truth was preparing to emerge. The kind that cannot be silenced with mockery, because names can be forgotten, but legacies, not. The sky began to change. A thick cloud covered the sun in an almost symbolic way, casting a shadow over the bench where James still waited. The atmosphere became denser, as if the air was holding its breath. A woman passing by stopped and stared for a moment. I didn't say anything, just stared. There was something in that old man's posture that broke any shallow judgment, a kind of dignity that could not be explained, only felt. And then a sound cut through the noise of the city. Quiet at first, but dense. An engine that didn't fit in with the ordinary cars on that street. It came from far away, but approached with precision. There was no rush. There was purpose. Each beat of the engine seemed to tell a story of its own. James shifted on the bench. He snapped his fingers as if preparing his body for something important. The old military instinct pulsed beneath his skin. The instinct of someone who recognizes the sound of command, even after decades of silence. At the agency, someone looked out the window. He frowned. Did you see that car? An imposing, black, armored SUV parked in front of the building. The doors remained closed. The engine is still running. But inside, someone was about to rewrite the meaning of honor in front of an audience that thought they had seen it all. James didn't seem surprised. He just took a deep breath. And now, comment there. Honor does not expire. The SUV's doors opened with a sharp click, the kind of sound that doesn't demand attention, but does demand respect. A pair of black boots hit the asphalt as if treading on sacred ground. The man who stepped out was dressed in full uniform. Clean camouflage, medals lined up, each telling a story beyond words. His eyes sought out only one person. And when they found them, time seemed to slow down. James Rourke, still seated, lifted his chin slightly. He showed no sign of surprise. There was no room for surprise between 2 men who knew the value of silence maintained for decades. The general approached in a straight line, his steps firm as if in a ceremony. And then he stopped 2 meters away. He clicked his heels, raised his hand to his forehead, and saluted with the firmness of someone who was not following protocol, but sealing a debt with his soul. Instructor Rourke, permission to speak. James nodded, a tiny gesture, but enough. The 2 stared at each other for 2 seconds that seemed to drag away all the memories of a war that the country was trying to forget, but that they still carried in their bodies. Inside the agency, the sound of laughter fell silent, as if someone had pressed an invisible button. The manager, who had previously been making low jokes, now watched from the glass door with wide eyes, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He recognized that uniform, that face, that rank. And more than that, he recognized the embarrassment coming at him at a gallop. It was as if the very marble floor of the store was threatening to crack. The general turned slowly. He looked at each person inside as if assessing soldiers standing at attention. And then his voice cut through the air like a blade. "This man taught me how to survive. He shaped me. He gave me character." He took a step forward, took a golden pen from his pocket and asked, "Bring the papers." "I'm going to buy the car. In his name." There was immediate commotion, but no one spoke. An attendant stumbled as he tried to open the door to the contracts room. The employee who had mocked James minutes before now seemed invisible, trapped in her own shame. An awkward silence fell like a heavy curtain over the entire store. Outside, the general turned back to James and added in a low voice, but one that everyone could hear, "He's not here to prove anything. I am." James didn't say a word, but the way his eyes shone behind the dirty lenses said it all. The weight of the humiliation was still there. It wasn't something that could be erased with a gesture, no matter how noble. But for the first time that day, he was not alone before the silent court of the world. The scales were beginning to move. As the contract was being hurriedly filled out inside the agency, clients looked at each other with expressions that mixed guilt and surprise. A couple slipped out. A child pulled his father by the hand and asked, "Is he a hero, Dad?" The man just nodded, his eyes filled with tears, and couldn't say anything else. The general then opened the trunk of his own vehicle and took out an envelope. He handed it to James. Inside was more than just money. It was a card with a special seal used only for high-level internal communications. A way of saying, "You still matter. You are still one of us." Emotion rose in James's throat, like a gale that had been contained for decades. But he held it as rigidly as he had held a rifle in the 1970s. He took a deep breath, straightened his spine, and murmured, "I just wanted him to get to school safely." The phrase echoed, small, human, but powerful. Because in the end, all of that, the shame, the pain, the waiting, was for someone. For a grandson he wanted to protect. For a legacy he wanted to pass on without having to explain it in words. And at that moment, the car didn't matter anymore. The gesture mattered. The recognition. The truth that finally broke the crust of ignorance. The manager, trembling, handed over the key. The general did not take it. He simply pointed it at James. "It's his. And now you all know who he is." James took the key with both hands, as if holding something sacred. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. But his eyes said what his mouth could never say. A kind of disconcerting peace. The certainty that the world might mock a man's name, but never what he had built. And right there, in the middle of the sidewalk where he had once been ridiculed, there was now respect. Not for the shouting, but for the silence that teaches, for the firmness that remains, for the legacy that resists. Right there, respect is not begged for, it is earned. James sat in the seat of the new car with almost ceremonial care. His hands, marked by time and years in invisible trenches, slid over the steering wheel with silent respect, not for the vehicle itself, but for the meaning it now held. It wasn't about having a car. It was about having regained something that, for hours, the world had tried to take from him. Dignity. The key turned in the ignition with a firm click. The engine responded smoothly, and James's eyes lit up at the sound. It was more than just an engine running. It was a promise being fulfilled. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Behind him, the agency was completely silent, as if no one there knew how to react. The manager, standing at the glass door, tried to hide his discomfort. An employee lowered her head. The young people who had laughed earlier were now filming in silence, without subtitles, without irony, as if they knew they were witnessing something that was beyond explanation. Before putting the car in motion, James opened the glove compartment with a soft click. He took the military coin from his breast pocket, the same one that had crossed jungles, wars, and hospitals with him. He noticed the soft shine of the piece, even though it was worn by time. And then, with a calm gesture, he placed it inside. It was as if to say, "The mission is over, but the story is not." Next to the coin, there was also a note with the old handwriting. That number, that sentence. He no longer needed to keep it bottled up inside. Not because it stopped mattering, but because the promise had been fulfilled. And there were witnesses. Outside, the general stood firm, as if he were guarding the memory of a soldier. When he saw him leave, he raised his hand again in greeting. A clean, direct gesture, full of respect. And James returned it with a slight nod, before putting the car in gear and starting to leave that place. But what happened next was even more unexpected. At the corner of the street, an elderly woman approached the car with hurried steps and a grocery bag. Her eyes were moist, her expression hesitant. James stopped the car. She leaned forward slightly and said in a choked voice, "My husband served with you in Cambodia." He spoke of Instructor Rourke as if he were a myth. "Thank you for still being here." James didn't know what to say. He just touched her hand lightly and smiled. And in that touch, there was something that the whole world seems to have forgotten. Gratitude without show. Respect without demands. Truth without marketing. As he walked down the street, his cell phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from Miles, his grandson. Just one line, but enough to break through any emotional barrier. "Grandpa, I just watched the video. I'm so proud of you." The tears, the ones James had been holding back since the first look of disdain at the agency, came now. Not as weakness, but as release. He pulled over for a moment and let them fall silently. There, in that driver's seat, was no old man. There was a hero who had finally been recognized, not for the medals, but for the way he lived. And even after everything, James didn't feel angry. What he carried now was something else. Transformation. An internal change, as if the weight of the past had finally found rest. He knew he couldn't change the world. But it could leave marks, the kind that time does not erase, and that the truth confirms with time. The streets were normal. People walked in a hurry, cars honked. But to James, everything seemed to slow down. That car, which was supposed to take Miles to school, now also carried a story, a memory that could no longer be ignored. And as the sun set on the horizon, he gripped the steering wheel tightly, as if holding something too precious to let go. Right there. Inheritance is not what you leave behind. It is what you carry. If you've made it this far, perhaps this story has touched you in a special way. Because deep down, we all know someone who has been discredited, judged before being heard, or who has carried their own truth in silence, just waiting to be seen. If this content made sense to you, if it moved you, leave a "I saw it through to the end" in the comments. It's your way of saying that there is still room for stories that speak of respect, memory, and transformation. Take advantage and subscribe to the channel. Here we bring stories that the world tends to forget, but that deserve to live again. And if this video made you think, just imagine what comes next. There's a video right here that continues along the same lines. Click and come with me. Let's go together.